Hello and welcome to the AVForums podcast for the 4th of September 2013. And we move into September with yet another AVForums podcast. Thank you very much for downloading and listening. And joining me this evening is AVForums Assistant Editor Steve Withers.
You ever had sex with a chicken, Jack?
Movies Editor Simon Crust.
Is this more on number one? Put more on number two on the phone.
News Editor Mark Hodgkinson.
I've got money, you know. I'll give you whatever you want.
Games Editor Mark Botwright.
Are you going to propose to me?
And Audio Reviewer Ed Selley.
Son of a bitch stole my cigarette.
So here we are for yet another podcast, and September is a big month for AVForums, and we'll have a special podcast in the next couple of weeks explaining fully what's going to happen, because it's all change at AVForums. You will see a brand new forum, a brand new editorial, and a brand new design to go with it all, with new features and lots of exciting stuff. We're not going to go into it in too much detail tonight, but stay tuned for that. September's going to be the month where everything changes, and I'm sure we're going to get lots of complaints.
No, everyone's going to love it.
Change is good.
Yeah, because the internet always responds well to change. I mean, every time Facebook changes, it's just universally positive what happens, isn't it? Oh no, wait.
So let's kick off with some hardware news, and we're starting to sound like a broken record, which Ed hates. He loves his vinyl. But 4K news, again, more of it. So on Saturday, we're recording this on Monday, Sky broadcast for the first time a football game in Ultra HD, or 4K as we like to call it. And which game was it, Mark?
It was West Ham versus Stoke, and it was
Absolute cracker then.
Yeah, I think it's cracker there, haven't they? So,
Should have just turned
two
it
cracking
off.
footballing teams. Yeah, and it was the first end-to-end live broadcast altogether, and certainly of a football game. It was shown to a few Sky execs, as you would expect, and Sky presenter Martin Stanford. Who is he, by the way?
He's the bloke that used to do the tech file or technophile.
Right, okay. That will explain it. Yeah, and he posted something on Sky's own website this morning explaining the experience. It was all shown on a 84-inch Sony, possibly the one that Steve looked at, and he seemed to enjoy himself, but he let slip at the end that they won't be releasing a Sky UHD TV PVR before the standards for both HDMI 2.0 and H.265 video compression have been finalised and ratified, which seems like a sensible approach, and probably not massive news, but that's the first time they've really come out and even said they're thinking of doing one.
I suppose the question is, how long is it going to take for them to ratify those two standards, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think
Is it going to be a
H.265
couple of months, or is it going to be, late next year or something like that?
HDMI 2.0 has been in the offing for, 18 months or something?
Mm.
To be fair, the more people that hang fire, the more impetus there is for them to just stop bickering, agree on it, and get on with it. What? I think that's it ultimately. I mean, thinking back, obviously, to the earlier days of HDMI, when we were going from 1.3 to 1.3A, quite a number of larger organisations, not necessarily brands you've heard of, but the people making the hardware, said, unless you agree across the board what it's going to do, we're just not going to bother. We'll just stay where we are. Even though it was strange, 1.3 to 1.3A, it sounded comparatively minor. It included some reasonable changes, but it was actually one of the most sort of cohesive moves over that there's been involving HDMI, if you could ever describe what they've been doing as cohesive. So I think personally, it makes perfect sense to me. You just hang fire and say, look, we're not going to bother. We're not going to invest in any of the actual hardware until you've nailed down what it's going to do and how it's going to do it.
Yeah, to show how cohesive they are, didn't they stop giving it numbers at one point? They said, right, it's too confusing for the customers. I think they stopped at 1.4, and they said, no more numbers. And now they're coming back with HDMI 2.0 to argue about all over again.
I don't have a lot of good words to say for HDMI, but yes, if you like, that encapsulates just the whole nature of a horrible, compromised, nasty connection that is sort of USB but worse in so many ways. But yeah, that's entirely right. But you can normally force people to do sensible things by just saying, look, we're not going to play until you've agreed how you're going to do it.
Yeah, I think it's entirely sensible of Sky really to wait it out. They're not going to be in the position of wanting to issue upgrade boxes like the TV manufacturers might have to. That's for sure.
Well, on the latest one with the connection box, that's
just
a
perfect
example.
Brought that to mind, don't you?
Yeah, perfect example. But what was interesting with this 4K broadcast was that they did it properly. So they had a director, they had the 4 cameras, 4 f55 Sonys, with shallow depth of field lenses and so on, which was the difficulty was keeping focus. For the engineers, because obviously shallow depth of field, your focus point moves all the time, especially in football. But it was interesting that...
Do you reckon, Phil, that's why they chose Stoke versus West Ham?
Yeah, maybe. But obviously there's difficulties in there that they have to iron out. I mean, the F55, it's a cinema camera. It's a large sensor camera. It's designed to work with shallow depth of field lenses, obviously to look cinematic. So they'll have to do something there in terms of broadcast suitable cameras. But it sounds like they did it properly, and I looked at the tweets that Martin Stanford put out on the evening that they were doing that, or the afternoon they were doing that, and there was a couple of quotes in there from the director saying it was a little bit harder to cut between cameras. It was taking its time, obviously with data. Large amounts of data, but the interesting thing was no need for cameras for close-ups.
I found that very interesting.
Yeah, he felt.
And if you've seen them, if you've seen one in real life, then you know that's true because the resolution is incredible.
Yeah, so that was interesting. There could be advantages there for a broadcaster not needing the 27 cameras that they have at the minute. Just having 4 or 5.
Yeah, that's one thing that Mills said, wasn't it? That it definitely would need less cameras going forwards with 4K.
Yeah, so
it's going to be interesting. I mean, obviously, the area where I'm most looking forward to this in a sports sense is Formula One, and they can't. It would be interesting to see how talk about that slow data transfer kicks in because. They can't physically reduce the number of cameras by that much because there's line of sight issues. It doesn't really matter what the resolution is if you're just going straight into a billboard or the back of somebody's head. So it'll be very interesting to see how and if they can square that particular circle. I mean, given how long it took to go to HD, I don't think there's any particular rush, but I'll be interested to see how it gets
10 years
on.
in their time schedule.
Yeah. So it was interesting what they said. Less cameras. They'll keep the phantom cameras for the ultra slow-mo. And cut between the two, and one of the comments was that they didn't really notice a difference cutting between them. So it sounds like it went well. We just need them to ratify HDMI standard, and it looks like the HEVC or HEVEC or however you want to say it, compression standard seems to work as well because they put
Is anyone calling it HEVEC but you?
I don't know what to call it. I think H265 is easy.
HEVC.
HEVC. It sounds too much like QVC. Shopping channel.
Imagine QVC and HEVC.
Oh, no thanks.
You can get some really nice detailed
I'll
close-ups on those, those fake jewellery.
So
orange skin.
While we're all talking about 4K TVs, LG are still banging on about this bloody OLED that we've yet to see, but they've now taken the curve out of it. They've gone back to flat, but they put a silly picture frame around it now.
I'm assuming somebody pointed out to them that one of the major flaws in their curved OLED was you couldn't wall mount it. So they've gone, okay, good idea. So now they turned it into a giant picture, and it looks, with due respect to LG, hideous.
According to one of our members, it's removable, the picture frame, so all is not lost. Because that is going to
can you unclip it,
silly.
or does it need a chisel?
Well, anything's removable with the right tools. Same with Dr. Tells.
So, I mean, Steve's going to obviously see this week, IFA. You're off on Wednesday when this podcast goes out for that. And we'll also be following the news at this side. I mean, IFA, not really... Right, whose mobile phone is it?
It's not mine.
Nothing.
But it could be mine. It's over there.
So IFA, not a show renowned for launching cutting-edge products. You have to wait for CES for that. But obviously... LG still banging on about this OLED. Whose phone's that?
Not mine. Mine's not even in the room.
Not mine. Mine's off.
It's Ed's.
Is it not? It's
It's
not
yours.
actually
It's
here.
yours.
Sorry, I've got an iPad with me, but that's it. Well, hang on, it's a 3G iPad. Oh, that might be it.
Yeah.
Professional as always. So IFA's not a show that's renowned for major product launches, but LG's still going on about this OLED. Thankfully, they've gone back flat again with it and away from the curved monstrosities that Samsung seem to be wanting to put out there into the market. Another interesting bit of news today as well was that Sony have cut their TV prices again with their 4K LED TV prices, the X9s, 3299 and 49999.
Well, they cut them it was a week before last they cut them, wasn't it?
Sony have dropped them to bring them in line with Samsung's current pricing, so we can assume the next stage will be LG dropping their prices, followed by Samsung dropping theirs again.
Which is all good for the consumer.
Yeah,
but if you're going to buy one, buy the Samsung, because that one's updatable. We don't know about the others yet.
There is that to it, yeah.
So, like we're saying, IFA starts on Wednesday. It's going to be hot and humid, according to the weather. Steve, I don't know if you've had a look on that.
I had a look, actually. Yeah, it's going to be quite sunny and hot on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. It's my surprise.
Great weather for you to be stuck in massive halls.
Yeah, love it.
In darkness, looking at products. So, Steve's going to be covering TV and tech, and Ed goes out on Monday. Ed?
I'm actually out at Sparrow's Fart on Sunday morning, back on the Monday evening in time to report back at the podcast into my own unique take on.
What, you're going to be back for the podcast?
That's the plan.
That's a quick visit.
Well, yeah, you know. I got round it in a day last year. I wouldn't want to do it again, but, you know.
So you're going to be reporting on the audio side of things and white goods, is that right?
Yeah, white goods especially.
White goods correspondence.
And if there's any tech prams that are...
Joking aside, I'm sure that'll prove distracting in its own way. But yeah, I'll go around and I'll take some interesting pics, see what we've got.
Is that it for hardware? I thought it was more than that.
Didn't talk about Saracens versus Barbarians, but it is kind of the same story, really, isn't it?
It's just a footnote, really, because it would just be say, well, it's not the first ever now, after them coming out and broadcasting it.
West Ham Stoke is basically a rugby match, surely, anyway.
Yeah.
For my sins, they are the football team I give the most of a out, but you know that's not
West Ham or Stoke.
West Ham. I was when I was at university. I lived sufficiently close to the ground that it was an idea to have at least a passing understanding of what they were up to, even if actually in my heart of hearts I didn't care. So yeah, I find them endearingly hopeless. I like that.
Traditionally, they're a good footballing side.
Well, I used to live next to Saracens ground, so I suppose that gives me...
You pretty would do, wouldn't you? Was it in Hong Kong?
No, North London.
Hong Kong Saracens.
Not Fosters, mate.
Yeah, Steve's the bloke down the pub that's always done one better than you have.
11 a reef. You've been to Tenerife. Steve's been to 11 a reef.
This goes up to 11.
Steve invented the question mark.
Anyway, that seems to be our hardware news for this week.
It's been a quiet week, I think, isn't it, boys?
A bit of a quiet week, but then IFA...
Actually, I suppose it would be, isn't it? Because IFA's coming out, so there was an announcement.
Yeah. And funnily enough, there was an invite sent out from a UK tech company today for a press launch on Wednesday. Did they check their calendar on that one? I don't think there'll be many turning up at that. It seems to be every tech journal. I was going to say worth their salt, but you're going, Steve. It seems to be they're all heading out there this week. So it should be interesting. Next week's podcast should be a bit better for hardware news and discussions about big burly Germans and their sausages. So moving on, we're going to talk about movie news next. So let's talk movie news. And Steve, what's at the cinema?
Well, this week I have seen With the Millers, which is a comedy, and I use that term loosely, about a drug dealer who loses all of his drugs and has to go over the border to Mexico to bring back about 2 metric tons of weed for his boss. Now, in order not to draw attention to himself when he's going over the border, he decides the best thing to do is get a huge RV and a fake family. And because cops never really look at, families going on holiday and they're able to bring it all back easily. So he gets a local stripper, played rather unbelievably by Jennifer Aniston, to be the mum. And then a local runaway girl, played by Emma Roberts, daughter of Eric and niece of Julia, to play his daughter, basically. And then the local kid who lives in the apartment block nearby, to play his son. He's played by Will Poulter, who's actually English. He was in Son of Rambo. and was Eustace in the third Chronicles of Narnia movie. And he does a very good American accent, I have to say, and is by far and away the best thing in the film. Steals every scene he's in. Yeah, and they go over the border. They pick up all the weed, and obviously, they get back across the border quite easily. But then various adventures ensue as they try and get back to Denver to deliver the drugs on time to get paid. And obviously, if you had to take a wild guess, you could say, do they develop into a real family on the journey? Yeah, well spotted. There's a scene where Jennifer Aniston gets to strip, so at least you can see that all the exercise has not gone to waste. Still not very believable as a stripper, though, to be honest. More believable as a mum, to be honest. It's
you have
funny.
Much prior knowledge of strippers
of strippers, yes, a great deal of knowledge, an unhealthy amount.
Didn't
it must be said
she's not attractive. I don't think she's an attractive woman. I think she works hard at what she's got, so she's in good shape and she's got nice hair. But she's got pretty ugly face, to be honest.
This is descending into one of those down the pub conversations.
Very rapidly.
I wouldn't touch her with yours.
We've just lost one female listener
on Britney Spears these days.
Yeah, and
Christ almighty.
And the ironic thing is Withers that's talking about her hair.
Yeah. So, I haven't got him, so I can't appreciate it.
He's all the more appreciative.
Exactly. Anyway, the film is mildly amusing in places, but frankly, it's a bit predictable. And I think I gave it a 5 out of 10. So don't bother going to the movies to see it. Just pick it up on DVD or Blu-ray one evening when you're bored. And you have a little bit of chuckle, but it's there are some funny scenes, and as I said, Will Poulter just pinched most of them himself. A couple of nice little cameos in there too that are worth a laugh, but basically it's pretty mediocre stuff. For Jennifer Aniston, she is a quite talented comedian, but she really needs to fire her agent and get a new one because she has done some shockingly bad films since she left Friends. Really has. I mean, she's had some ropey bloody movies, and this is actually good in comparison with most of her previous stuff.
I quite liked her in Horrible Bosses.
I
quite like that film, mainly because it reminds me so much of previous working experience. Not actually the Jennifer Aniston one, more the Kevin Spacey chap. But yeah, gives me a warm fuzzy feeling inside knowing I don't have to do that anymore.
So that's that one. And the other film I went to go and see was The Mortal Instruments City of Bones, which apparently is based upon a reasonably successful series of tween books. I'd never heard of them prior to this.
That's me sold. I had to learn a lot about my sister-in-law. I joking aside, my sister-in-law is most of the way through writing a trilogy, which she has a proper contract for. So yes, I had to learn all about the genre as such, and it just astonished me about the sheer number of virtually identical books that are out there, just basically where there's no description given to the female character, so every single female reader can pretend to be her, and the male character is described in excruciating detail. It's just painful.
Obviously, you've just described this film. I mean, I think you had a computer program. You just fed it various data, so Twilight, Star Wars, and Harry Potter, and press F4. This is what you're going to get. Basically, it is the most derivative movie I've ever seen in my life. It literally has love triangle, actually love quadrangle. They go one extra because they throw in a bit of homosexuality as well. So you've got the girl, main character. She fancies this guy, nice big cheekbones, and he's got another guy he fights. They're called shadow hunters. And they basically hunt down demons, and there's vampires, and there's werewolves. There's a whole sort of another world that exists parallel to ours. Which we called, I can't remember what they call it now. It's ridiculous. But they call people like us mundanes as opposed to muggles. I mean, it's just staggeringly derivative. And you're thinking really? Was this necessary?
Like Buffy.
Sorry, I forgot. That's a good point. And a heavy dose of Buffy the Vampire Slayer too. Actually, yeah, you're right. Actually, now I think about it, it's very like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, only nowhere near as good, obviously.
And I bet the writer had never heard of Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah, about as much as the writer of The Hunger Games hadn't heard of Battle Royale, I see.
Exactly.
It's derivative in every sense. I mean, I don't think it's just. But there's a bit where someone reveals to be someone else's father, and then two other characters turn out to be brother and sister. So they've also been nipping a fair bit of Star Wars too while they're at it.
They don't blow up a large building at the end, do they?
No, they don't run down a trench and then shoot at something. Yeah. It's also I'm not even quite sure why. Well, they don't really explain what the mortal instruments are, so I don't know why it's called that. And City of Bones isn't a city; it's more like a basement. So that's a bit of a letdown.
So
they apparently gone into pre-production. I should just say that the star playing the female character is Lily Collins, who is gorgeous, but I can't believe her dad is Phil Collins. Boy, she lucked out getting her mum's looks. She is very attractive. Not a bad actress either. It's got Lena Headey's in it, but only in it briefly. Everyone in it pretty much is English, except, Lily Collins is English, but she grew up in most of her life in America. She does actually have an American accent, and there's one other character with an American accent, but everybody else has an English accent. I'm not completely sure why everyone speaks with an English accent, even though it's set in New York, and no one ever points this out to anybody. But so
they play a lot of Sting at the same time. They're all Englishmen in New York, or they just miss out on that obvious cross-marketing opportunity.
Yeah, it's bizarre, but it's very derivative. It was pretty boring. It was a shed load of exposition in it, to the point where you're thinking, well, you just shut up and do something interesting. It just felt like, you can just see the production meetings. Does it make any sense? Not really, but it looks cool. Okay, then we'll do that then. It's just, unless you're, I guess if you're a fan, you've already gone to see it. And I'm guessing most people listening to this aren't going to be fans anyway, so don't bother, is my opinion.
I'm so glad you see this shit so we don't have to.
Well, don't worry, because tomorrow night I'm going to go and see Rush. I'm really looking forward to that.
That sounds like it's going to be great.
Yeah, well, it looks awesome in the trailer.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that sounds like it'd be brilliant. I mean, the true life story of their rivalry, it has to make a great film, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, just for those who probably don't know what it is, Rush is about the 1976 Formula One season when James Hunt won the world championship and Niki Lauda had his
spoiler,
crash.
Man.
I don't think you can call it a spoiler. It's a spoiler. That's like saying the Titanic's sank. Oh no, giving away the ending, mate. But I mean, it's very much about the relationship between the two drivers and that season, and it was an unbelievably dramatic season for obvious reasons.
Yeah, I watched a documentary the other night about it. It was on BBC Four. Really good. Yeah. Really, really good documentary. So I'm looking forward to the film. And of course, Ron Howard. So his visuals are always pretty stunning.
He's a bit of a journeyman, but what he's very good at is period detail. If you look at Apollo 13, I mean, he actually did shoot some of it in weightless environment, for God's sake. So, he can definitely, and the stuff I've seen in the trailer looks like they've got a time machine.
Yeah, he does definitely look like he's put the research work, the leg work they've put in for authenticity is really quite something. Peter Stevens, who is best known, I suppose, for doing a lot of the work on the McLaren F1, but I think basically that in 1976 was like the T-boy at McLaren or something similar. But he sort of assisted in trying to make sure that the cars themselves, how they moved, being driven by the guys, how it just sort of felt and looked and stuff like that. And large numbers of people that were there and knew what they were doing have put their effort in, and it really is. I'm really hoping it's going to be great. I said months ago it was the film I was most looking forward to this year, so I really hope they don't screw it up.
I mean, the guy playing Niki Lauda doesn't half look like him as well, and Chris Hemsworth doesn't look too bad as James Hunt. He looks the part. He does sound, obviously, and look a bit like Thor, which I suppose is inevitable, really, because it's the same guy. But yeah, no, I think it is. I have high hopes for tomorrow night, so I'll either be very excited or very disappointed when we talk about this next week.
Ed, what's this that you've just put in the chat window?
Well, after Steve was so derogatory about Phil Collins as a sex object, I thought I would pop in a site which I remember seeing a couple of months ago. It appeared in a newsletter to which I subscribe, and it is Philrotica, Sexy Tales of the Former Genesis Drummer, and it's written. It's a masterpiece. I know great writing when I see it, and this is it. I mean,
is this that weird fan fiction that gets written by people who should know better, really?
I think this might be written by someone whose tongue is a little bit further into their cheek. I quote directly.
Or in this case, Phil's cheeks, I think, by reading it.
The tempo of their lovemaking was rough and unpredictable, a far cry from the rock-solid timekeeping that marked Phil Collins out as one of the finest stickmen of his generation. And yet the intensity with which he pounded her youthful flesh was undeniable. As Alison submitted to the former child actor's sexy ministrations, her whole body throbbed like a giant bass drum. So rhythmic were her gasps of ecstasy that she would not have been surprised if a roadie appeared to place a microphone above her. That's just fabulous. And I promise all of the rest of you on this call, and anyone look at this podcast, if you download the website, I suggest that you don't do it in a workplace or in a public place, but it is an absolute joy. That is comedy Mills and Boon writing right there.
Well, they've just managed to fit in all the song titles. All right, yeah, that's later on this evening planned out then.
Ringo Starr rolled over and touched the wound on his head. "You'll suffer for this, Collins," he said in a ponderous tones, made famous by his time narrating Thomas.
The ex-Beatles mocking laughter filled the Peter Gabriel suite.
"Silence, you hussy," said Ringo Starr with an evil laugh. "You're about to feel a touch that's anything but invisible."
Oh, God. You know, I was once researching, because you know that when they originally started shooting Fellowship of the Ring, they had cast Stuart Townsend. Was it Stuart Townsend? Yeah, Stuart Townsend, the Irish actor, had been cast as Aragorn, and then about a week into shooting, they realised he was too young for the part, and they had to recast him with Viggo Mortensen. I was researching this, trying to find out information about any photographs of him in makeup or anything like that. And I ended up on this page, and someone had written an elaborate. It started off, I thought it was legitimate. You know, he was distraught about being sacked and was in his dressing room and taking off the makeup. It made him trying to make him look older for the role. He's peeling off his laser makeup, and then in comes Orlando Bloom to commiserate him. And then they start having sex, and I realised this is some sort of bizarre piece of fan fiction that I'd stumbled upon. It's funny what you find on the internet, isn't it?
Stumbled upon.
It's the longest excuse for.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have to read it all, obviously, but I did.
To be fair, you found the link for Phil Rotica fairly quickly.
Yeah,
I mean that was posted up quick. as soon as his name was mentioned.
I'm still talking when you posted that.
What can I say?
Right, talking about trouser exploding events, then Ed. I believe you were getting slightly excited at the prospect of Kurt Russell joining the cast. Fast and Furious.
Slightly excited, unless they reanimate the corpse of Steve McQueen to be in Fast and the Furious 7. I honestly don't know how they can make this much better. And by better, I mean truly preposterous. Like being smashed in the face with a giant boxing glove of noise and stupidity. Like any good Fast and the Furious film should be.
Well, they've already got Jason Statham in, which I didn't think they could really top that. If they get Kurt Russell in, this could be the greatest film ever made. Because it's also set after Tokyo Drift, so now we're getting back into the continuity. So Han's dead, and are they going to bring in Lucas Black as well from Tokyo Drift? I'm not sure. All I can say is right now, I am genuinely excited. This is the only film series in the history of the world that gets progressively better with each film and makes more money. I mean, that's just unbelievable.
It's going to be a solid Oscars prospect by 2020.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's going to sweep the board at the 2020 Oscars.
Watch out, folks. He said Tokyo 3 times now. You know what's coming next.
Actually, I did.
Were you big on the drift scene, Steve?
No, it wasn't big on the drift scene, but for some reason, Vin Diesel was staying.
Oh, here we go again.
No, he was staying in the penthouse suite of my apartment block.
Oh, Jesus.
I didn't realise this, but I walked out the front door one morning, really hungover and feeling like shit, and there was a massive Japanese paparazzi. Scared the life out of me because I thought they would, start flashing at me first because there was this bald bloke walking. Bald guy Jim walked out. They just figured it was Vin. Then they realised pretty quickly it wasn't.
Were they all using fisheye lenses?
Yeah. Yeah, another nice bit of fan fiction there from Steve. Moving on, one for Mark Botwright. Miyazaki to retire.
Say that again.
Miyazaki is retired.
Is it Miyazaki? Is it Miyazaki? Yeah. Miyazaki.
Miyazaki-san. Yeah, he's announced his retirement.
Shut up! This is Mark's bit.
It was a ventriloquism, Matt. Yeah, Hayao Miyazaki to retire. Latest film, The Wind Rises, at Venice International Film Festival. Looks like it'll be his last film. One of the founding members of Studio Ghibli, and it's been a long old time. He seemed like a figure that would go on forever. He's got a huge amount in his canon now. Howl's Moving Castle, Castle in the Sky, and he's just got classic after classic. And because I suppose it seemed that he made films very much in in a nostalgic style because they seemed very much timeless. I think people just assumed that he would go on forever, but sooner or later, I think everyone has to call time on their careers, and The Wind Rises sounds like it's going to be was quite an emotional project for him. It's caught a little bit of stick from some commentators, because it's basically telling the story of the chap who designed the fighter plane that was used by the Japanese in World War II, and so therefore, yes, and so therefore it's one of those stories of, you can see the poetry in it. You can see how an artist would come to it and say that there's something beautiful and tortured about a figure who would want to create something, who's got this inspiration, but ultimately it's used for warfare, for terrible ends. It's a theme that's been used a lot down the years, but obviously the problem is that it cops a little bit of stick from perhaps the left who don't like it, and then the right don't like it, and ultimately you've got an animated film that almost seems too mature. Traditionally for the kind of more realistic. I wouldn't necessarily say just the more mature, but the things that tackle everyday life, you tend to assume that Studio Ghibli, it's Isao Takahata who's tended to tackle those kind of things with, My Neighbours the Yamadas and things like that, with more mundane everyday things, these more almost grounded in reality. So to kind of do away with anthropomorphic figures, kind of animals and the like, and just all out whimsical nature, and just go towards something that's still very much recent history and still very much a kind of wound in the Japanese psyche in some ways. I think it's it was a brave move, and it's probably scratched that itch that he's wanted to make something more poignant and more lasting, should we say, that's centered around reality for a long time.
So what you're saying is that this one definitely doesn't have any giant furry animals in it?
You know what? I honestly haven't seen much about it yet, and so I'm very much. I'd like to stay away from knowing too much about it until I see it. But I would very much doubt it, given the subject material.
You couldn't fit My Neighbor Totoro in one of those Japanese fighter planes, could you? Really?
No, possibly not.
Well, I lived in Japan.
Oh.
During the war.
No.
And I was going to say, quite often the Japanese or the Asian titles of films are slightly more literal than the English language versions. And Up was called Old Car and His Flying House. Made me laugh.
Clearly.
I think Citizen Kane was called Rosebud's a Sled. Oops, spoilers.
That would have saved me a couple of hours.
Ooh, I'm gathering enough material that by this stage next week, my Steve erotica site is going to be quite something to behold. So.
I've probably let a bit too much go this week, haven't I? Really, with strippers and. Yeah.
If we just take all the little sound bites and we could paste them together really, really badly for you, Steve.
Don't give Phil any ideas.
Say your fictitious meeting with The Rock that I'm going to write in Phil Boone style is going to be
It's in Berlin.
Save that for the new site. Lead story, day one.
What would the headline be?
Bringing out the worst in you.
What about this? Between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, that's a good one.
There was a female friend sent a thing on Facebook, those really annoying things with a photograph and a bit of text next to it, it's supposed to be funny. This one was genuinely funny. Describe your sex life using film titles.
Oh.
So mine's would be Home Alone.
Midnight Run.
Gone in 60 Seconds.
Fast and Furious.
Burn After Reading.
Mission Impossible.
Willow.
The Hole.
40-year-old virgin.
Iron Man.
Toy Story.
Ghost Rider.
The Grey.
The Ring.
Hedwig and the Angry Inch.
One for Steve. The Rock.
Snatch.
The Shooter.
Free Willy. I hate that film. It's the first time it's ever been of any use to me.
Hotel for Dogs.
Big.
Theodore Rex.
The Punisher. Collateral Damage.
Hayao Miyazaki is retiring. A sad day for
How have we gone from that to this?
I don't know.
Right, so quickly, Simon, round up what's coming on the site movies-wise.
Okay, rather than what's coming up in the next week, because, we never know with the post. It's quite a big release month. We have Iron Man 3. We're going to be looking at that. Hollywood had the great chance after the Assembles Avengers to go quite intimate and small, but decided to throw 50 Iron Men at the end. Spoilers. Reasonable film. We're looking at the 3D version. We were just talking about Fast and Furious. We're going to be looking at Fast and Furious 6. Couldn't stand it myself. Can't stand the series. But I'm sure it's going to look great.
So wrong, Simon. It's a masterpiece.
Yes, of course. Yes. Okay. And of course, released today, Star Trek, wasn't it? Into Darkness.
Oh, yeah, I want that.
Was released today. I have watched a bit of it. 10s all round, I think, apart from the extras, which are pants, but the picture and sound quite phenomenal.
Yeah, annoyingly.
Based to rock the foundations of the earth, in fact.
I don't know about in this country, but in the States, there were extras, but they were on retail exclusive discs. So like a commentary track from J.J. Abrams is on the one if you buy it from, I don't know, one of the retailers, which is a worrying trend. Oh, actually, no, the commentary track was available if you bought the film on iTunes. So I don't like the sound of that at all.
Yeah, the disc I viewed this afternoon was the 2D version of it, single disc. Looks and sounds incredible. Terrible film, of course. And the extras aren't great. We're actually looking at the 3D version of the film.
Did you say terrible film?
Terrible film?
Oh, terrible film.
It's not a terrible
It's
film.
not terrible.
Oh, it is. It's a terrible film.
This
It
and
is.
Fast and the Furious. You sir, you
No,
just watch all of these things sober or something.
You're sad.
the problem with the Star Trek is it had so much promise and it's just wasted. It's wasted opportunity.
Really?
No, it's as a science fiction action film. Yeah, I'll say it's very, very watchable. If you take off the Star Trek bit, then yeah, it's great. They try and force emotion on you. It's a story that's already been done before. Nah, doesn't. And I've gone out and bought it and watched it. I mean, never mind.
More fool you then.
Yeah, I know.
Send me yours.
But it does look and sound great. So
Did I mention Gone in 60 Seconds for that one?
yes, twice now. It doesn't make 120 seconds.
Moving on, and let's go to some games news. Mr. Botwright, Xbox One voice commands. They're only going to be available in 5 countries at launch.
Well, there's been a slight update. That was the original story, that they were only going to be around in the US, UK, Canada, France and Germany, which basically meant English, French and German were the only languages that they managed to get working. But there has been an update to that, and they've said essentially that only really relates to the phrase Xbox On.
So hard is it? Surely that's the one that should have got nailed. Xbox, right? You've got one.
Most languages.
And then on. You just need to find on in a few languages.
See, I it's got to be something to do with the fact that, they say they don't want it spying on all the time, but it's clearly got to remain listening. And so therefore it must be hard to kind of almost find some kind of a sleep state for it and for it to be able to just pick that up perfectly in any environment. Whereas I suppose it's assumed that once you've started kind of talking to it, once you've started the interface, then you pretty much will have the right surrounding conditions for it. So I don't know, maybe that's it. But they have said that voice control will be available in 10 of 13 launch countries. So, I mean, they still haven't even really hit that. So it does seem a fairly major feature that they're starting to kind of roll back on. It's this continual rollback from a grand, very enthusiastic, very optimistic ideal of voice control and being able to turn it on to, 5 countries really being able to actually turn it on via voice control.
makes even less sense when you consider some of those countries where it isn't going to be available are Australia and New Zealand.
Well, this goes back to a video
that they speak English there as well.
Phil posted a video on his Facebook.
Yeah, I was just going to come on to
that. Yeah.
And, I mean, it does, but as I understand it, certain English or spoken English regional dialects, and it's not just in the British Isles or the ones that we think about, are they're an acid test for these voice control systems. Apparently,
they've been working on this for 5-6 years, haven't they?
Well, yeah, except that you think about it, Mercedes has been working on voice activation for a lot longer than that, and their system still has a habit of exploding on contact with Geordie. And there's an island somewhere off the coast of Newfoundland where people essentially still speak Tudor English. And car manufacturers take their cars there to see if they can actually get anything to function at all. So yeah, I mean, we naively assume that we're one sort of relatively global language, but no, it's not quite as simple as that. But yeah, I am a bit surprised that they're not even having apparently coped with full mainland United States, which has got some fairly cracking accents going on. It does strike me as weird that they're not even venturing to claim that Australia is good to go.
Gonna give me a hand here, getting something to eat, and something simple like a chip butty or maybe a Jimmy Dodger, and then a pint of I don't know, McEwen's Lager or Caledonian 80.
I'm not aware of any meetings about thing without Mahatma Johnny Georgia and Joni Chipbati.
Oh, for sakes! See me, right? I want a Jammy Dodger, like a fucking jam sandwich, and a chip butty. That's just bread with chips. I'm not even going to get into the pints. Just get me that.
Sorry, I don't understand. I need to get some pajamas.
Look you fucko. I need a sandwich, a Jammy Dodger. It's just bread and jam. The chip butty, the McEwen's Lager. Can you just do that, please, you f***ing go?
No need for profanity.
Oh, for f***'s sake, that's it!
Apple Scotland, having a wee bit of trouble.
Well, yeah, but there's all sorts of these. My favourite for this is the story, the automated booking for the One Direction movie, which I sincerely hope that Steve is off to see and talk to us about, just as an aside. In order for the computer to say One Direction properly when you're ringing up to book, what they actually type in phonetically is wand, W-A-N-D, erection. Because it won't say it properly any other way. And now every time anyone refers to that band at all, I just think of One Direction.
If I go to the cinema and ask for one ticket to One Direction, I'm definitely going to get arrested.
Just film the whole thing on your phone, Steve. You'll become a YouTube sensation overnight. Admittedly, you'll be in prison, but everyone else will be
in prison.
Anyway, you were saying, Mark.
Until we went down this U-Tree offshoot, I'm not fully sure where we were. Voice control. Little aside to this.
Stop it.
He may have actually killed Phil.
Would you like a ticket for One Direction? Look, Phil's not coming back, so just keep talking, Mark.
I think you might need medical assistance.
He can use Siri to call for an ambulance. Oh, no, wait. Hang on. Once again, this has got, at least you've got an extra day to edit this into some simple sanity.
Oh, no. I'm in pain. It wasn't even that funny. Right, where were we?
Well, I think Mark was going to talk about Sony getting in on the act.
Right, okay. Right, Mark, you're just going to have to pick it up. I can't.
Yeah.
No idea where we ended up.
Segue to that.
And on similar news.
So what about Sony, Mark?
Oh,
Nice.
right.
That was beautiful.
Thought you'd appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, Sony have confirmed that via the PlayStation camera, which was jettisoned from the original pack, but you will be able to buy one for about £55. They will be able to do voice navigational voice commands, and it will be able to recognize faces as well. And so, they haven't actually unveiled much to the public. Apparently there was something shown to retail partners at the GameStop Expo, but we'll just have to wait and see. But it does at least seem like they're moving along the same general lines, so it should be interesting to see how those two technologies face off against each other.
Yeah, agreed. You got to think that probably Kinect has bearing in mind all that we've just said, but we've got to think that Kinect's probably got the head start, or the more money pumped into it at least.
I guess it lives or dies, Mark. The only thing that, thinking out loud, and if you know better, please feel free to berate me. It depends, I guess, whether there's any third-party developer stuff in this where Sony can, say, can we buy into somebody else's extensive catalogue of voice recognition stuff? Then actually the amount of things that you have to edit in that are bespoke are comparatively small. I can't believe that everyone sets out and does it from scratch, even necessarily Microsoft.
No, there's some very good. I'm trying to think of the tech company behind it, but there's some very good voice recognition in. Is it a couple of the TVs, Panasonic and LG? I think it is. LG in particular seem really good, but they use basically, like you say, the same middleware to achieve the solution. So there's tools out there already for the actual recognition part.
I tried that voice recognition, and then it types what you say software. I tried a free trial of it years ago. All it demonstrated was just how much I subconsciously swear whilst typing. Effectively any work I'd have turned in that I'd have dictated to the computer would just basically look like I had
your reviews. Proofing your reviews, Mark. I often think that's what you're using.
Really?
Yeah, because there are like words where they sound like the word, they sound similar, but you've written it down.
That's just no.
I started thinking, is he using voice recognition software? The lazy bastard's not even writing it out himself.
No, if only. If only. No, that's just how my brain works sometimes.
So, Mark, wrapping up on the games, 2DS, did we need it?
No. You know what?
We need a 3DS to be precise.
3DS, sales picked up. That's doing quite well. 2DS, I mean, it's interesting from a design point of view in the fact that, they kind of moved all their handhelds and slowly, they go through these design iterations and they ended up with the clamshell design, which seemed perfect for portability. And now they've gone back to this weird kind of slab, like
It looks huge. I can't imagine wanting to hold that for a while.
No, it's smaller, but it looks unwieldy. It looks like
it doesn't look right in the hand.
Yeah, like the controls are in the wrong place.
That conversation is going to sound quite strange.
Just put that in wherever, every 30 seconds.
It looks huge. I wouldn't want to hold that for long.
We're back to Phil Rotica there, but
we're still looking at that picture.
But what's interesting is that there's just one large screen there. They haven't even put in two screens. It's a lesson in cost cutting. So they've just put in one big touch screen. Resistive touchscreen, and then just put the plastic over the middle of it to make it look and cut off the corners so it looks like it's actually two screens. But it's going to be lighter, it's going to be cheaper. They've jettisoned the 3D effect from it, so they've kept a couple of cameras on the back so you can take video and take pictures in 3D supposedly, so you can send them to other 3DSs. But it's a pointless feature. It always was, and so I really don't understand why they even bothered keeping that in there. But compared to the fact that the 3DS XL these days, I think it's kind of about £160, something like that, and this is going to be about 110. So it will sell, and it's strange how Nintendo usually end up managing to kind of stratify the handheld choice and keep gamers used to this idea that there will be design changes and that will eventually give way to some kind of incremental upgrade.
Is this a case of the games press again jumping to conclusions when this was announced, saying what's this, blah blah blah, taking the mickey, yet the ones that have actually got it in their hands and started playing with it are now doing a full 180 and saying, well, actually this isn't too bad?
I think the problem is that there's this weird sense of your initial reaction is it's horrendous, it's ugly, it's terrible, and then you suddenly realise, well, every time people have said that about Nintendo, they've usually ended up wrong. But then you go back to the most recent case that people tended to say that en masse was the Wii U, in which case they were right. So it's really hard to judge Nintendo on this. Ultimately, they shift handhelds because they've got enough developer support, because they're easier to develop for, and because you get the Nintendo first-party titles on there. And I do think at a knockdown price, this is going to sell to kids coming up to Christmas and that kind of thing. Anywhere around that £100 mark is where it'll shift to kind of the kind of tween-age crowd.
I quite like it. I think it looks pleasingly retro, but then I'm a sucker for retro, so I guess
it has got a little bit of the kind of Game & Watch look about it in some ways.
I like that.
I'm sure it just seemed a very weird product.
Yeah, gut reaction was, my God, that's ugly. What have they done? Because I mean, the 3DS XL is beautiful. It's sturdy. It's well designed. It's ergonomic. It's clamshell design. You can chuck it in a bag. It's a perfect handheld. And so to go away from that just seems kind of odd. It almost you want to say
it just
Nintendo,
looks like we need to make some cash quick. Well, hopefully people will buy this one.
Yeah, and they will do.
It's got to be said, after some of the things we've discussed this evening, any mention of the word clamshell isn't particularly appealing. Maybe that's just me. Well.
Right, best of luck.
It's been emotional.
It has indeed.
You might be up all night with that one. One Direction, Jim.
Leaving these podcasts always feels like leaving the scene of an accident for someone else to clear up. Yeah.
A very long, slow car crash.
We've crashed the car and then we just say, best of luck. Chuck the keys.
I always think at the end of it, that was utter shit. And then when I listen to it, I think, it doesn't sound too bad. So tip of the hat to your editing skills, Phil, because...
I don't know. I think we need to start taking a poll on how long it takes to get bumped from tech podcasts to spurious bollocks.
Miscellaneous.
Because if I'm honest, our considered tech quotient is diminishing.
It's diminishing.
This week was particularly bereft of any kind of real technical information, wasn't it?
LG's new television looks bollocks. None of us like Stoke or West Ham. And
oh yeah, I did a film review, and within 10 minutes later, you couldn't even remember what the name of the film was.
I'm sorry, you conveyed it didn't leave a lasting impression, and so it proved to be.
But one film review segued into talking about strippers.
Yes.
Well, no, there was a stripper in the film, or rather. Jennifer Aniston was playing a stripper in the film.
And we discussed Philerotica, so, Is Philerotica staying in, Phil?
Yes.
Excellent. You need to do that sign out. Instead of the standard AVForums podcast music, you need to do that to Phil Collins is in the air tonight.
Yes.
Okay, and sadly, that's it, or maybe gladly, that's it for another AVForums podcast this week. And my thanks to Mark Botwright.
Cheers, Phil.
Midnight Run.
Midnight Run.
Yeah, no, I knew that. See, throwing you off the scent.
Cheers, Phil was an actual quote.
Yeah, it was. That was in a. There was Phil in the film.
He's reading Philerotica again.
All right. Hang on. Sorry, I can't read my own writing. I wrote this one down.
No, I have that problem.
Yeah.
Can't read your writing either.
Is this going to upset me?
I don't know. What's your quote?
Oh, touche.
Mark Hodgkinson.
You get it started. That's the best plan I can think of.
Simon Crust.
I'll tell you what, if you don't cooperate, you're going to suffer from fistophobia.
Ed Selley.
You have two forms of expression, silence and rage.
And Steve Withers.
See you in the next life.
You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook at bookmarkavforums.com for the latest reviews, news and video. Don't forget, September, big month for the forums. We'll have more news about the big changes that are coming to the forums, that are coming to the editorial and the brand new design. Look out for that podcast. It will be a standalone special with forum founder Stuart Wright telling us about all the new features that the site will have. So stay tuned for that one. And don't forget, you can leave us a rating on iTunes if you enjoyed the show. Make sure it's 5 stars, please. I'm Phil Hinton. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you again next Wednesday, hopefully.